So we're going to get started and let people join as they can. So nice to see all of you. My name is Morgan Craven. I'm the National Director of Policy Advocacy and Community Engagement at IDRA. Welcome to our first of 4 sessions that are really designed to be focus groups on how schools can use the federal relief funds that have come out recently to advance educational equity. Just as a couple of reminders, please continue to share in the chat. We are recording. If anybody does not want to be recorded, please let us know and we can adjust. Really quickly, I think it's important to talk about why we're here and what we're going to do for the rest of the hour. We're of course here because schools across the country had to make major adjustments when COVID hit and faced a lot of new challenges dealing with virtual schooling, addressing the needs of their students. But as we all know, a lot of those challenges that we saw were really just revealing to many people and in some cases exacerbating the existing inequities that we have in our public school system. And so of course we have the federal relief funding that came down, which we'll talk about in a quick and dirty way in just a second. And now we're at a point where schools have a lot of new federal funding. Oh, that's okay. My intro was just, I'm Morgan Craven. I'm the Director of Policy Advocacy and Community Engagement at IDRA. That's as far as we've pretty much gotten. And just talking about how the federal relief funds can be used to address new COVID costs, of course, but what we really want to talk about is how they can be used to address the systemic inequities that existed long before COVID, particularly for our historically marginalized students. So students of color, students from families with limited incomes, emergent bilingual students, which is the new term in Texas. If you had not heard, we are no longer calling them limited English proficient students. We are acknowledging the assets that they bring to our classrooms. I want to just shout out Araceli for her work changing that law this legislative session. But our emergent bilingual students and all sorts of students who are from communities that were hit hardest by COVID and who have for a very long time been experiencing those inequities in their schools. And so today we're going to just quickly go through what the federal funding looks like and talk about what Texas in particular has done, since I believe we are all located in Texas, and then spend some time brainstorming ways that schools should be using those funds to advance educational equity. We might do this as a group just together. If more people join, we'll do small breakout groups, but we want to give everybody a chance to weigh in. And one thing that we are planning to do at IDRA is take the recommendations that we developed through these 4 sessions that we are having focused on federal funds and issue recommendations to school districts and schools for how they can spend those funds equitably. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to share before we jump into the federal funds piece of this? And I think since we're a small enough group, we can actually do a quick round of introductions if you all don't mind coming off mute to do that. Christina, can we start with you?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Cristina Munoz. I use she, her pronouns. I am an education policy fellow with IDRA. So throughout the legislative session, I worked on issues related to ensuring an equitable response to COVID-19. So some of the work that I worked on was in related to student engagement, student mental health, and issues such as this. So yes, excited to be here. Thank you all for joining. I could pass it to Araceli.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. My name is Araceli Garcia. I use she, her, ella pronouns. And I'm also an education policy fellow with IDRA. As Morgan mentioned, my issue areas are specifically centered around emergent bilingual students and immigrant students. And so we're excited to see how these federal funds can be used creatively to make sure that students who are hit the hardest by all the inequalities exacerbated by the pandemic get to see relief from that. I'll go ahead and pass it to Gloria because she's off. Because you're off mute. You have your camera on.
Unmute. I'm Gloria Miller. I'm a professor at the University of Denver in the College of Education. I've been invited to be on a committee at the state level in Colorado that is doing pretty much the same question in terms of how to best use funds to support students of color and also our rural districts. So I was interested in joining the conversation to see how it's being done in other areas. Thanks.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome from Colorado.
Yes, from Colorado. I will pass it to Buck Clemons.
Thank you. It's Buck Clemens, and I'm just an observer. I live in Alabama, and I was just curious about the topic.
Nathaniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nathaniel Aviles. I'm a legislative aide at Texas House of Representative Diego Bernal's office. I also just started a new job at Bexar County as a court monitor, working with foster youth, male foster youth ages 14 to 18. And I guess I'll pass it to Sue.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue McMillan. I'm president and CEO at the Greater Texas Foundation. And a lot of our funding and work is targeted toward underserved populations. And so I'm here to learn. And hopefully from there, we can further augment funding in the same direction. Let's see, Thomas.
Hello, my name is Thomas Marshall. I'm also an IDRA Education Policy Fellow. I have worked on digital equity and inclusion along the Texas legislative session, as well as working with communities. We now have a state broadband office here in Texas, so really important that we're able to get federal funds to schools and to hospitals and other different entities like that to expand broadband internet access. So we're really excited for this conversation. And I'll pass it to Sulema.
Good afternoon. My name is Zulema Carrion Sanchez, Dr. Zulema Carrion Sanchez. I'm with IDRA, a senior education consultant. And because I work for school districts, this is a very important topic for me. So I will pass it on to Michelle Vega.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Vega, and I'm the Chief Technology Strategist at IDRA. And I'm just here to support.
And add your wisdom, of course. Okay, I have like 4 slides to set the stage for the federal funding. And I know based on what all of you said, where all of you said you're coming from, you probably know this information already. So I'm just going to fly through them. But if there are any questions, please feel free to stop me and ask. And though this is Texas focused, of course, states across the country have received these federal funds, but I am going to briefly mention how they've been used in Texas to sort of set that stage. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get a quick presentation. I'm going to stop my video while I do this. So, as I mentioned, this is our first of 4 sessions focused on how federal relief funds are used in public schools. This is a session that's focused on general educational equity and how we can develop recommendations to advance educational equity in schools. I'm going to quickly just go through the 3 pots of money that we are sort of talking about. So the first is from the CARES Act, which was a law that passed in 2020 that created the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. So when we hear folks talk about ESSER 1, ESSER 2, or ARP ESSER, they're all the same general fund of money, and more money has been poured into those into the ESSER fund, which with each of the 3 acts that we're going to talk about that passed. So this was in March 2020. It allocated $13.2 billion to through 12 schools across the country, and those monies were distributed based on Title I formula to schools across the country. Texas took this money and used it to replace state funding to schools. So while a lot of schools in Texas were expecting new money to cover new COVID costs, the state did what is called supplanting. So rather than supplement state funds with the federal money, they supplanted state funds and replaced what they would have sent to schools and held on to that state money and instead just replaced it with federal funds. So it was really disappointing for a lot of school districts here in Texas who thought that they were getting their share of about $1.3 billion, but did not see that money, that new money. The second pot of money is from CRRSA, which is the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. This was signed into law in December of 2020, made available at the beginning of 2021, and this is what is commonly referred to as ESSER 2. What Texas did with their about $5.4 billion of ESSER 2 funds was to sit on them for many months. They just recently released this money to schools about a month and a half ago. And when they did that, they did not release all of it to schools and school districts. Instead, what they said was, we'll release the money according to the formula. However, if you got hold harmless recently, which was essentially an adjustment to how schools were able to receive funding. So it was an adjustment to make sure that schools did not lose any money when their student attendance went down during COVID. The state said, if you got that adjustment to the state to protect your funding, then we are going to reduce your federal relief funding by that amount. So while the state eventually did claim the money and distribute it to schools, they reduced it again, supplanting state funding that would have gone to schools. So while Texas schools did get some money through ESSER 2, they did not get all of it that they probably would have expected if it was simply distributed by the formulas. The third pot of federal relief money is from the American Rescue Plan Act, which was signed into law in March 2021, so just a few months ago. And this was by far the largest, which is why you see all the dollar bills on the right. This was the largest of the three funds. And this is commonly referred to as ARP-ESSER. So this is $122 billion to K-12 schools across the country. 20% of that funding has to be used to address learning loss. And there are actually several additions to the American Rescue Plan Act, several requirements. And one was that states and school districts have to seek public input for use plans. So many states, for example, have already sent out a link to an online survey. That's what we got in Texas to solicit public input for how these funds should be used equitably. School districts are required to do the same. And so part of what we are doing here today is sort of contributing to that fund of public knowledge or public recommendations around the use of funds. And it is a requirement for the American Rescue Plan Act, which is a significant amount of money going to schools. So all three funds, school districts can use them for many similar activities, but I'm flagging here the allowable uses for the last fund, the ARP, the American Rescue Plan Act ESSER funds. And everyone can kind of take a minute, sorry for all the words, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible. There are actually many more allowable uses. A lot of them have to do with making sure schools are up to date in terms of air quality, sanitation, cleaning schools, and doing sort of the work around sanitation related to COVID. But I think these are the interesting allowable uses that we can use to sort of frame our conversation and our recommendations today. You can see they include addressing the needs of children from the historically marginalized groups that we were talking about at the start of the hour, planning for implementing activities during long-term closures, purchasing educational technology to support students, including students from low-income families and children with disabilities, providing mental health services and supports, planning activities related to summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, addressing learning loss, and the last one, other activities that are necessary to maintain operation of and continuity of and services, including continuing to employ existing or hiring new school district and school staff. This is a very broad list, and it hasn't been interpreted broadly, particularly that last one, any activities that are necessary to maintain operation of. And that's sort of, because of this list, that's sort of how some states, including Texas, got away with supplanting, not supplementing, using the federal funds to supplant, not supplement state funds. But the Department of Education has come out with guidance that says that the ARP-ESSER funds are not to be used that way. And so here's the list that we have for what school districts and states can use this money for. So now we're going to spend some time brainstorming, hopefully spend the majority of time brainstorming what this could look like for schools. We're going to talk about what are the most pressing needs in K-12 schools as our first question, and then how would you spend federal funds to meet those needs? And we have a couple of sort of guiding principles that we want to emphasize for all of you as you think about this. We want to be creative and dreamy. So I think, you know, kind of the straightforward responses, you know, maybe PPE at one point or personal protective equipment at one point would have been a very clear need that schools have. But at this point in time, with such significant funds, I think it's worth our while to think deeply and creatively about how these funds could be used, again, to advance educational equity. I encourage you to be systems focused. So when we think about problems and solutions, how do we sort of think about and frame systemic problems and what solutions look like to address those? Of course, we want to be equity driven. So we want to think about the groups of students who have been most impacted by COVID-19 and by you know, long-standing educational inequities, and how can our recommendations really support those students? And then we want to be precise and concrete, which may seem like it is the opposite of creative and dreamy, but I don't think it has to be. We want to say, well, we identify this as a problem and here is the exact solution, even if it is creative and dreamy, that we recommend schools use this funding to implement. So that's our goal and our charge for today. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions they would like to share about either the federal funds, my quick overview, or what it is that we're doing today with each other?
How much money in that last tranche of funds did Texas get?
So Texas approximately gets 10% of the total funds, given the number of students that are here in the state. So it's about $12.2 billion from the American Rescue Plan Act, which is not an insignificant amount of money at all. Hi, Rachel, welcome. Welcome to others who just joined. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Yes, Gloria. And you're on mute.
Sorry, can any of the funding be used for early childhood programs that are connected to the district?
I believe that if they are connected to the district and the district would be supporting them with funds anyway, then yes, they can be used that way. We also see, so the part that I didn't go over is that states also have a fund, it's the GEAR fund, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, I'm messing up that acronym, fund, which can be used for education related expenses, including early childhood centers. So some of the money for those that are not connected to school districts would be coming from the GEAR fund. There's also, as part of just sort of the education stabilization fund in all of these acts, a separate higher education relief fund. And so that's where those funds could be pulled from.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to divide us into two groups so we still can go to breakout rooms. You'll have someone from IDRA, at least one person from IDRA in your group. And during our breakout rooms, we're going to do two things. One, spend some time just thinking alone and writing in a Google form, answering 4 questions, 3 of which are the same. One of them, what are the most pressing needs that you see for students today? And then if you could spend these funds, how you want to spend them? What are your top 3 things that you would spend them on to advance educational equity in schools? After we spend about 15 minutes doing that, you guys will have a group discussion and kind of feed off of each other, hopefully, and come up with some new ideas, and then we'll come back together and do a wrap up. Does that sound good? Great. Let me create breakout rooms.
On student and family engagement, we were also thinking some of our lofty ideas were blending some of those funds with community-based organizations that are already engaged in serving families, investing in more peer-to-peer sort of tutoring, and just heightening tutoring in general for students as a way to sort of come back from learning loss, but really thinking about transformative ways to get students, building out leadership. We also talked about, on that note, thinking about how we can also activate higher education students and even professional degree students who are pursuing professional degrees with high school students in really intentional kind of ways, whether it's student social workers, student teachers, law students who are pre-professionals in these degrees, but also just exposed students who might not otherwise be exposed to those career pathways, can offer mentorship, can offer meaningful experience. I said my dream would be to run a law clinic out of a high school where you train students to give DACA trainings and know your rights trainings, but these are our lofty and specific dreams. We talked about updating technology and resources. And yeah, we think that there's many ways that the state can use these funds. So thank you, Gloria and Nathaniel, for these really wonderful ideas.
I love those ideas too. And I love just the everybody wanting to pay students. I'm for it. Let's figure out a way to do it. Thank you all so much for your participation. We will follow up with the final recommendations and ask, how you would like to be connected to that final list of recommendations. We have 3 more sessions, as I mentioned at the beginning, focused on the use of federal funds next week's, which is at the same time. And I know you all got this email, is focused on using federal funds specifically to advance racial justice, particularly for Black students. The following week, we'll talk about federal funds in support of emergent bilingual students. And then the last week will be student-focused recommendations. So thank you all for your time and your wonderful thoughts and contributions, particularly before a holiday weekend on a Thursday evening. We so appreciate you, and I am happy to stay on and chat with anybody who would like to, and feel free to be in touch. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.